The role of propaganda in hybrid warfare, the role of the media, the impact of fabricated news. That's our topic today. But apart from this, it was work. They won't believe me. So a warm welcome from me for the third panel, last panel for today. I got the impression that some of us are a little bit exhausted from the discussions we had this morning and after the lunch break. So now it's media. Media is always something which cheers you up, which brings you up if there's a certain element of exhaustion. The role of propaganda in hybrid warfare, this is our topic. And please don't think that I'm a rude person, because I'm not going to introduce my distinguished guests. You find it all in the booklet, and I'm sure you read it, you went through it to see who will be addressing us. But there's one person who's not in the booklet, and this is Susanne Spahn. You're in the booklet, but not as a speaker. So, Susanne jumped in. Thanks a lot. She just published a book. I'm going to translate this into English, or do you want to do it yourself? Is it published in English? In German. So it's the image of Ukraine in Germany, the role of Russian media, how Russia influences the German public. I think this fits very well into our discussion today. And we agreed that she will also say a few words about the German election campaign and Russia's possible attempts to influence it, to spoil it. The role of propaganda in hybrid warfare, the role of the media, the impact of fabricated news. That's our topic today. Perhaps some of you remember a famous British TV program called The Day Today. It was running in 1991-92. It was a fake news show compiled once a week by colleagues of BBC Two Newsnight, young colleagues who were poking fun at the habits of the news business. And the tagline of that show was "The Day Today, turning fact into doubt." This was a joke 25 years ago. But after the launch of Russia Today and Sputnik and other attempts to spoil public opinion, I think now it's not. No one would understand it now as a joke, but as perhaps the tagline, the slogan of some colleagues of mine working in Moscow. Let's have a start. I would like to ask Ihor Smeshko to address us first, because he's Ukrainian and this is taking place on Ukraine soil, and Ukraine had to suffer from Russian propaganda. Ihor, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you, the Naumann Foundation, for this great possibility to be with you today. The subject which we are covering right now is very important indeed. We all the time speaking about the hybrid war, new phenomenon, nothing new. All war which witnessed this mankind from the very beginning was hybrid, and used all four elements of the state power to achieve the final goals: military, economy, diplomacy, and information. Even 7th century before the Christ, Emperor of China used to wrote that achieve goal with the arms, it's not big deal. Achieve goals to influence adversary, that adversary doesn't have government, doesn't have any chance to be surrounded and conquered. This is the real victory. And basically, even the civil war in Russia, 1970, 1922, this was also by the Bolsheviks, real hybrid war. About this was wrote essay in Paris in 1922 by Colonel of Imperial General Staff Mesmer, which described the elements and said in future war, the first would be propaganda and destroying the ability of the enemy for resistance. Right now we are having a Ukraine war, but in this war, the four elements of power very skillfully changed by the Russian Federation government, and this is also not astonishment. You know, President Putin, 2002, he was very eager to find the possibility in one and another way to become important leader, to raise Russia at the world level country. He knocked at the door to NATO, he knocked at the door to European Union. He even considered that President Bush, Prime Minister of Britain, might be those with whom to have a deal. After the Baltic states became the member of NATO, he considered himself personally insulted, because when he called to the Prime Minister of Great Britain after this and asked what is going on, we spoke, and the Prime Minister said, but this is not the case of Russia to decide the future of the Baltic states. And started the process as it is. Mr. Putin proclaimed, the West, this is evil. Russian Federation have the special role in this world. There is the special civilization, Russian civilization, with the unique spirit. And beginning from 2005, especially in the military doctrine 2010, already there was prescribed in Russian Federation that information warfare, this is one of the main warfare, and the threat to the Russian Federation is Western civilization mentality, which gives to the Russian mentality blow, historical Russian mentality, and so on and so on and so on. If you take into account that 95% of all information to the Russian people goes through the TV sets, and all media under the control of governments, basically we have the state in which inside the state is another state. This is FSB, which controls all government bodies. Remember, I think 2007 was created National Anti-Terrorist Committee. Mr. Patrushev became the chairman, and there was a unique situation. In this committee, filial of which was in every regions of Russia. The chief of FSB was chairman, and the local governor, local prosecutor, on the level of federation in this committee, chairman, director of FSB, but under him, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, chairman of the parliament, and so on and so on. It was very peacefully to create the body on which one secret service might control all government bodies of the country. And of course, regarding to the media, there is in strategic communications in Russia two goals. One goal, by the way, the most important. This is inside. Inside information which are distributed to the Russian Federation, it's completely propaganda with the best quality production. Remember, Lenin in the 1920s said, among all the different kind of arts, the most important for us, the cinema. Most film created, there was collectivization, there was millions of killed people, there was artificial starvation in the Ukraine. But on movie, which used to come to the kolkhozes and different places, marvelous future, dreams, final result of communism. There is right now propaganda inside the Russian Federation. They took from the West additionally one element from Hollywood. It's not anymore boring and dull. They make an entertainment, they make a very good production, high quality. If you will look inside the serial of historical movie, There isn't history in this at all, almost just few facts, but so skillfully prepared, making inside the Russian people the glory about the great country, the center of civilization. Sometimes, last movie when I saw Sophie about the Byzantine princess, which became wife of Ivan III, Moscow prince. Look for this movie, very skillful made, heavy budget. I doubt who was first, Byzantine Empire or the Moscow. Moscow in this movie much more cultural and spiritual than Byzantine Empire in the heritage. That is, first of all, this is in strategic communication is to have more than 80% support of population of all events which are around the world. And other strategic communications, this is to the West. President Russian Federation does consider that there's no equal partner in the world with him. He has strong vertical of power. He has system which might react immediately on the things. And what is the West? With whom to speak by phone with the West to have reaction on what they wanted to do. Basically, Mr. Berlusconi was those person which Putin felt themselves comfortable. Right now, basically, he considered that West is very weak, and Russia has the right to dominate about the future of Europe. And the inner abroad is legitimate part of the Russian Federation. And in this regard, Russia today, Sputnik and all the same, this is main goal, to destroy inside the Western country stability and to destroy the elements of democratic powers. If you will take into account that hundreds of millions US dollars, this is budget of these information services, and that officially and the doctrine of information security of Russia already prescribed all element and participation of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation to working in this regard. They are very skillfully working inside the democratic countries, and this is not my judgment. This is judgment of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, 2011. She said, 1991, we relaxed. Before we were quite skillful and spreading our point of view on the territory of the Soviet Union. After this, we decided it's okay, Russia moving to democracy, and we dissolved all our resources, all our expertise, all analytics in this regard. And right now, we are losing information war with Russia. And additionally, very important to understand, this is soft power concept which was established by our American friends. This is not the global information battle by the concept of Russian Federation. In the Russian Federation, this is not to spread the values all around the world or to have behind some values which attractive for the other people. What Russia might produce attractive for the other people. That is, main goal is to look for the key points inside democratic societies which might be criticized, emphasize this on the level this is subject number one, and to destroy the integrity of this society. That is why Russia, of course, have enormous resources to influence rightists, leftists, and the democratic countries, to use just making more corrupt the societies, even in the free world. And doing this bluntly, unlike in Western society, Russian government doesn't have the parliament, which are looking for the spending of budget, for looking for special operations, what the goal of these special operations. And once again, the West, unfortunately, does not have any strategy until now. NATO only right now are recovering, but still all members of NATO has own altitude. And that is, we have in the, once again, the situation in which the country with objectively limited economical, objectively limited military resources, this is also a very important point. I used to say this all the time. Russia has not more than 150,000 prepared, good equipped troops for the land operations. All the other, just to imagine, 1 of the 8 territory of the earth inhabited by 140 million people. Remember the China, this is almost 2 billion people which are on the part where after Ural Mountains, 1 person per square kilometers. Even right now, Russia took almost all reserves, all troops on the western side. About the strategic missiles, 50 strategic missiles, the most heavy one, were produced in Dnipropetrovsk. These missiles were produced during the Soviet period. Technical maintenance of these missiles all the time was on the shoulders of the engineers from Dnipropetrovsk Yuzhmash. I'm a missile engineer by the first profession, believe me. Limit of time already on the edge. And that is on the side of aggressor all the time just bluffing, using threat, and of course what threatens all of us, unpredictability, because one person might decide the fate of globe in some way. What we need to do? We need to do just to understand that it's supposed to start the real informational battle, just to wake up once again and to put the problem on territory from which are coming to us the information attack. Once again, yes, for democratic world it's something like so, it's how it would be. It's maybe not democratic and so on, but democratic world is under the heavy attack, and information, this is one of 4 elements of the national power, and sometimes much more powerful than the other which are not used. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now we have a case study, Germany, and with an outlook on the elections. Susanne.
So thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. I'm happy to present you the results of my study on Russian propaganda in Germany. So, telling the untold is the motto of the international agency Россия Сегодня and the RT branch of Germany, RT Deutsche. But when you look closely at these agencies, their positions are very similar to those of the Russian official policy. This is the strategy of the Russian state media in Germany, presenting official positions as an unknown truth and styling themselves as the true independent media, thus creating a counter-public to Western mainstream media. In a study on the role of Russian mass media in Germany, I identified 50 actors and analyzed more than 500 sources of Russian media in Germany concerning their activities and positions. The topic of my study, the image of Ukraine spread by the Russian media, is only loosely linked to reality. But this is not, this is, because the image itself is not important, decisive is the function of this image. It's, it seems to establish a concept of the enemy with the aim of mobilizing people in Russia and abroad. And when you look at this image of Ukraine and compare to the image of Germany in the Russian mass media, it's very similar. So when it's, because the same refers to the image of Germany created in the Russian mass media. So it turns out that we are a colony of the US, our government is just Washington's puppet, our democracy isn't real, and our media have been just manipulated. The Russian media serve as an instrument fighting the government, established media, and parts of society critically minded against Putin. Existing doubts among the population are picked up to spread insecurity and to exploit them for political goals. Currently, the topic of migrants is massively exaggerated in order to polarize and to split German society. Since the beginning of the year, Russian outlets have started a campaign to manipulate the public debate on the upcoming elections. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who has always been on the top of the list of the Russian enemies in Germany because of her sanctions policy, has become the target of a directed campaign that was started in January by Dmitry Kiselyov, the general director of Россия Сегодня. Here, Merkel was accused of being old-fashioned and promoting old fascistic ideas of Lebensraum. It was said that Merkel wants to, quotation, swallow Ukraine as a living space for Germany. While analyzing the reports of Sputnik News and RT Deutsch, you can see how these leading ideas are implemented on the national level of Germany. Russia has set tremendous goals. In November 2014, Россия Сегодня launched a worldwide media campaign named Sputnik International. By 2015, Russia wanted to broadcast its programs in 34 countries in 30 languages. However, the leading role abroad is played by the TV channel RT. In November 2014, RT Deutsch started its website and a German channel was supposed to follow. This still hasn't been implemented up to now. Unfortunately for the regime, the massive currency devaluation of the ruble jeopardized these plans. The budget was shrunk by a third. With regard to elections in France and Germany, the Russian State Duma increased public spending for their international broadcasters. The current budget of RT and Россия Сегодня consists of 387 million euros. This is a lot of money when you compare it, for example, to the budget of Deutsche Welle, which amounts to 328 million euros. Although huge amounts of money were spent on the international media campaign, the success, at least in Germany, seems to be rather limited. On Facebook, YouTube, and other online media, RT Deutsch has about 336,000 followers. Sputnik News, about 189,000 followers. The leading RT Deutsch show, The Missing Part, you have mentioned it yesterday, has been reduced from 5 to 1 broadcast per week. In Germany, the Russian media cooperate with right and left-wing journalists who support the Russian narrative in their own media outlets and at public events, such as the movement against Islamization Pegida. When you compare the range of Sputnik News and RT Deutsch to the range of nationwide media outlets, it becomes obvious that German supporters of Russia are the sharpest weapon in the information warfare. Former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and well-known journalist Jakob Augstein are just two examples of this media network. Nevertheless, the impact on the public opinion seems to be rather limited. According to a survey conducted by the Institute Allensbach, roughly 1/5 of the German population supports the Russian narrative of the Ukrainian conflict. It's interesting to see that about a third of right and left politically minded citizens would rather support Russia's President Putin than Chancellor Merkel. So it's not surprise that RT Deutsch and Sputnik News attack Merkel Christian Democrats but actively support the right-wing party Alternative for Germany. So to summarize, I have given some examples how Russia and the Russian news try to interfere in the debate on elections in Germany. So I named the campaign against Merkel. There's no objective reporting. They actively take sides for the alternative for Germany. At the same time, the enemies are stigmatized, especially Chancellor Merkel, of course, but also other critically minded parts of the population. And Of course, there are also a lot of activities on the internet. Just to name various Facebook groups, there are, for example, the German Friends of Vladimir Putin and other groups very actively, and of course the trolls organized by the so-called Agency of Internet Research in St. Petersburg. And last but not least, there's of course the threat of cyber attacks, as they already have taken place 2 years ago against the Bundestag, and also against the deputy of the Bundestag of the Green Party, Marie-Louise Beck. So of course this is realistic. So, to answer the question, what should be done or could be done to answer these challenges? From my perspective, there's more information needed, of course, as it is already partly given. For example, I would like to mention the site Stop Fake, issued by Mohila Academy, or the Disinformation Review, issued in Brussels. And in general, there are more publication needed. For example, when RT Deutsch went online in Germany, there were a lot of publications in other media that were analyzing concrete results and concrete examples of falsification of this Russian media in Germany. I think this is a very good example to inform the population how the Russian media is working. And of course, there are more investments needed into further training for journalists, because some journalists simply don't know how to estimate this news. And last but not least, I think it's very important to found more independent media in Germany for the Russian-speaking population, because they almost watch Russian TV channels, and they very actively support the alternative for Germany, and this is of course problematic. So thank you for your attention.
Next voice is from Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer.
So, hybrid warfare and propaganda. I recall from '95 very vividly when in Chechnya during the first Chechen war, I befriended and had drinks with several Russian psychological warfare officers who were performing psychological warfare operations against the Chechen rebels and the population. They were totally and absolutely bewildered with what they were doing. They were disposing loads of stupid leaflets from helicopters on Chechen villages that no one read. And, well, yes, they had one thing that they liked. They had one helicopter with a very super powerful audio system. And so they flew over a village and put on an enormous sound of some kind of music. It's like, you know, from Coppola film, Apocalypse Now, you know, the Wagner thing coming in. And they said, at least we scared some people. During that war, Russian press was totally free. Even the government-owned television, they were criticizing the Russian military, the President Yeltsin, who believed in freedom and free press. And Russia lost that war. It lost it totally. It was very humiliating. President Yeltsin got his approval ratings in the single digits as a result. And I believe that after that humiliating defeat, many in Russia, including our future great leader Vladimir Vladimirovich, decided in their hearts that never again, not meaning never again won't have any colonial wars, but never again will Russia be humiliated and defeated in such a nasty fashion. And look where we are today. The Russian hackers allegedly influenced the election of an American president. Russian fighters of the hybrid war, the green, small green people, are seen as a bane that can come into any kind of East European country and change its destiny. Of course, propaganda, warfare, diversion, insurrection, and secret operations are nothing new. They exist as much as warfare exists in human history. Soviet Union had, I think, about 50 different secret military combat operations in different parts of the world after 46 up to the year 2000. And almost all of them, practically all of them, excluding, of course, the Afghan intervention, were all secret. There were Russian officers and Russian units fighting in combat missions without insignia. So that's, and nothing was reported about them. It was all over the globe, in Nicaragua, in Abyssinia, in Algeria, in Indonesia. No one remembers already about the great Indonesia intervention. There was, it was Angola, it was Mozambique, Syria, Egypt, whatnot. So going into a foreign country secretly without insignia, it's nothing new at all. What was really new, say, in 14 in Crimea was the use of irregular combatants, the different kind of volunteer, self-proclaimed Cossacks, bikers, and don't know what, as a kind of cover, who were imported into Crimea to form the so-called self-defense units, and as a cover for the incoming Russian special and ordinary simple crack troops. There was up to 25,000 apparently deployed to Crimea, which is, of course, more than we have right now, special troops. So this this was new. This seemed to be very successful. It was a kind of, but this hybrid warfare was a kind of glove on the steel fist, because behind these Cossacks and rather strange people, not very disciplined often, and different kind of camouflage they bought I don't know where, came the real fighters, the Spetsnaz and the paratroopers and the Marines. And it was the Spetsnaz that actually occupied the Crimean parliament and locked up the deputies for them to vote in a Russian-backed government, for them to vote for the referendum. So this was not very subtle. Of course, this kind of use of the novelty of use of irregulars, and that hybrid warfare right now is recognized officially by the General Staff and its chief General Valery Gerasimov has been saying that this is important, but he has always been emphasizing that this is a Western thing, that the West went against Russia with hybrid warfare first, and Russia, as always, is answering only to the enemy. That there was these colored revolutions in Georgia, in the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, then the second Maidan, and that was the hybrid warfare. And so Russia was reacting with its own hybrid warfare. But unlike the West, we have the steel fist coming in. So after Crimea, there was the Donbass thing, where the same more or less different kind of irregulars were sent to Donbass with the addition of some Spetsnaz. It was apparently believed that Ukraine is weak enough to fall under that disturbance, that disturbing pressure to begin to disintegrate, which was actually did not happen. And the hybrid warfare in the Donbass was a total failure. By August 14, these hybrid warriors, these regulars and small numbers of Spetsnaz were basically defeated. With a lot of loss and a lot of effort, the Ukrainian military there was a couple of weeks left of the resistance, and the Donbass war would be over. So then came in the steel fist, came in regular troops, nothing hybrid, up to 12 battalion tactical groups with armor, with heavy weapons, using them very effectively, using a new tactic to find out where the enemy is and correct the fire of multiple rocket launch systems and howitzers, using newly acquired Israeli drones. The Ukrainians military were not expecting that, absolutely. We were defeated. So, but in a hybrid way, that didn't work. So this was so the history of hybrid warfare is rather checkered. Crimea a success, Donbass, the hybrid part of it, not a success. And in general, no one can call the situation right now in Donbass a success. It's no one's success. It's a very costly, semi-frozen, non-frozen situation that's, well, rather intolerable, most likely, to everyone, especially to Russia. It doesn't make any sense right now. So, could there be future for hybrid warfare as a thing? Yes, there could. Though apparently the Russian military and the Russian general staff, which traditionally is almost always under the command of tank generals, and General Gerasimov is a tank general, they believe not in kind of Spetsnaz coming in small numbers and doing it. They believe in tank columns coming in and doing it, in massive deployment of force, of armor, and of firepower. And that means that they can use, they're ready to use, and they say they will use hybrid methods, but just as either a foreplay or a diversion tactic. So this is kind of more traditional. Of course, the use of internal dissent. Again, nothing new in military history, but this can be used. It can be and may be used against Ukraine, where the opinion in Moscow right now is Ukraine is very weak. Ukraine is on the verge of a total collapse of its government, and that Russia would most likely try to help that happen. Will Russia be effective in such operations or not? I don't know. I'm not part of the planning process. The propaganda part of is, of course, a bit different. It's not, the propaganda machine is not under the command of the Russian General Staff. I would not overestimate the capabilities of Russia Today and Sputnik. Their success story is also very checkered. Attempts to promote the election of a friendly French president, François Fillon or Le Pen, failed. In Holland, they also failed. I mean, they maybe got some support, additional support, maybe not, at least it was a failure. In the United States, the use of, apparently, of propaganda and hackers could have maybe changed or not. It could have maybe changed the balance situation. But the balance situation in the United States was not the produce of Russia Today. Russia Today did not create Trump's power base, the guys in red caps. They most likely they never saw the Russia Today at all. So that's, you should not overestimate. But what you should not underestimate is the effectiveness of the Russian internal propaganda machine, which is not Russia Today, which is the entire Russian government-controlled TV industry, primarily. But also they work in the internet and in other medias. It is absolutely and devastatingly effective. On the level of Dr. Hebels, I would say. Very good. They can change the public opinion. In 1 week, they can change a country from being an enemy to being a friend and then back again. That's what polls show. So you can be, say Estonia was once an enemy, now it's not. Georgia was once an enemy, now it's not. America was an enemy, then when Trump was elected, it stopped to be an enemy. Now it's an enemy again. It's Orwellian, absolutely. And they work very effectively. They don't cover, of course, all of the population. But the majority, most likely a sizable part of the population, is manipulated. And that is a very serious problem. I think I said enough, and then we can have discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me here. Well, I'm not a media expert or public relations communication or any of that. I'm curious and read about this, but cannot discuss it professionally. Therefore, I'll try to put the hybrid warfare discussion into the more traditional security context. First, I totally agree that hybrid warfare is not a new phenomenon. It has been in the human history forever, practically. The term itself is fairly recent. It wasn't created in the when Russia annexed Crimea. It was created a few years earlier when Hezbollah used a variety of tactics to attack Israel, and Israel successfully countered that pressure, and there were some writings and under this term hybrid warfare. Historically, although in textbooks we get the short version in school, and in some movies and some novels, and many people tend to think that actually the conflict is decided by a clash of two armies, and whoever wins conquers the other or imposes its will on the opposing side. So people who are not very well educated may tend to think in those terms, but people who are interested really know very well that using military force alone is not advisable, is not efficient. Any opposing party uses all sorts of instruments of influence available to it. Even Sun Tzu, who wrote like 25 centuries ago, and he wrote about the role of diplomacy, intelligence, spies in the court of the opposing king, the role of spreading rumors in the troops of the enemy, and all that. And I think General Smeshko already quoted Sun Tzu, and I'll try to quote it as well, because he wrote that the acme of skill is to win without fighting. Actually, what we saw in Crimea was, of course, there was this capturing the parliament, preparing a referendum, etc., but nothing would have worked without introducing the polite green men with all the power behind them. I also agree with our colleague coming from Moscow that this is not necessarily a model which can be applied elsewhere. It was successful in Crimea, but last year there came a report examining 4 historical studies of attempts to use that same tactic, and Crimea was the only successful one. And there is an explanation which I'm not going now to try to provide to you why Crimea was a successful example, but we can hardly expect the same tactic to be successful elsewhere. On the other hand, we also need to recognize that our world since the 90s, the end of the last century, provides qualitatively new opportunities for one state to influence another state. The drivers for this development, in my view, the main drivers are 2. The first one is globalization, because almost all markets are open to just about everyone. Almost every country welcomes investments in its economy. The banking system and the financial systems are interrelated. We rely on our energy sources coming from abroad very often. The other driver is the development in information technologies, communication, and particularly social networks, which practically eliminate the distances. You can communicate with someone on the other side of the earth very easily, and people can send messages and form opinions and shape perceptions, etc. If you really have this intention. And in this new world, if a state, and it seems to me that Russia is such a state, wants to meddle into the affairs of another state, it has at its disposal a variety of instruments, and again, to refer to Sun Tzu, and the extreme skill will be just not to use military force at all. And in Ukraine, that's already not going to happen, barring some unforeseen events, developments in the future. But that doesn't mean that a different model, but that of exploitation of all the available instruments of influence cannot be applied elsewhere. And we saw some examples of that in the Balkans already. I think everyone here knows the failed coup attempt in Montenegro in the fall of last year, at the day of elections. There was something in the news this week that with the fights in the parliament in Skopje in Macedonia, actually the most active person was a Serbian intelligence officer, if you're interested. So things like that can happen. The challenge of a democratic society is how to respond to developments and to from which we all can benefit. We can all benefit from investments, from cultural exchange, exchange of information and knowledge and so on. And if one state wants to influence another state, it usually puts its act together very carefully, and it's coordinated, that's what I think at least, and coordinates its actions very well. Actually, Russia and the Soviet Union in the past had the experience with the so-called doctrine of active measures, or активное мероприятие. So KGB has quite some experience in trying to influence political processes and economic processes and media in Western countries. So that's nothing new in itself. But how we can react if a foreign country, opposing country, potential enemy, tries to influence us in such coordinated manner? The challenge is that in authoritarian regimes, you usually have a very clear lead. You have either, a spy agency or the military in charge, and everyone follows, and everyone acts according to the same screenplay or same scenario. While in democratic countries, that's very difficult to put this act together. And it's even more difficult in post-communist countries where we do not, and I see that in my country just about every day, where we do not have the culture of cooperation among different agencies. Because, in the communist times, you had the strong military elite, everyone subordinated. When the democracy came, we had all different agencies, all different ministries, everyone became a boss for his own organization. And we have this compartmentalization, if I can say, or stovepiping in the field of security, and we still cannot find appropriate and relevant models to cooperate among the governmental agencies. And it becomes even more difficult because the effective response to hybrid influence or set of influences requires not only coordination among the public agencies, but also coordination with a number of private actors, including media, including civil society organizations, and so on. So in my view, it would be worth to try and look for good practices in such interagency and public-private coordination in countering hybrid influences. And for all of us, since we discussed this in the previous session, it will be very beneficial if we have very in-depth, solid knowledge how Ukraine counteracts Russian activities in eastern Ukraine and all over Ukraine, actually, in the future. And I will finish by inviting you as an amateur, but I decided to create a Facebook group. It's called The Hybrid War, a couple of years ago, and I share news which might be of interest, so you can join and also share your news, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we were lazy, we could say we leave it here, we meet all in his Facebook group later today or tomorrow or so. So I have a couple of questions here for the panel, which are designed to sharpen our knowledge of this notion, hybrid warfare, what is it? And afterwards, of course, it's open to your questions and comments. Ihor and Todor, you both pointed out that hybrid warfare is not new. We know it from history, it can be observed in history, but I would like to know what makes hybrid warfare a war. When is this red line crossed? Using disinformation, using media propaganda in times of political crisis is normal, but why warfare? Would you like to start?
In Doctrine of NATO, 2010, there is the first time, once again was said what basically the Americans, I think this was secret directive of President Reagan, that the information is the first element of the state power. Economy, military, diplomacy, and information. We have the information revolution. We mentioned here, especially the democratic world, quite open and vulnerable for attack of this, because capitals, people, information is spread. And just to imagine, ancient Romans used to say, weakness is provocative, strength is the main deterrent. We have a authoritarian government in which there isn't parliaments, there isn't problem of planning, coordinating, executing, and coordinate of all agency, all in one hand. And that is culture, by the way, military institute of the Soviet Union, right now I think is a different name in Moscow, was the most famous armed forces of the Soviet Union educational establishment, in which there was 3 faculty. One faculty language training, very best knowledge in 2-3 languages. Mostly those guys used to go in intelligence services. The second was judicial faculty for the military prosecutors, military judge, court-martial judge. But third, secret. This was propaganda, information, warfare, and so on. There's the skills, there is very good quality of people which simply understood that they might attack in particular place in particular time. What occurred in Ukraine? If Ukraine wouldn't be weak, when there was attack on Ukraine, when there wasn't government in Kyiv, civil society in this country gave 100 lives. Just people without anything used to go against machine guns with the European flags. But there wasn't really the party, real democratic party, and prepared, good, skilled professional which might go and take power. Opposition which was in the parliament, students, the first when started Maidan, they didn't permit them to go on the stage and to have speeches. Maidan was against Yanukovych attempt to create dictatorship. And in this process of new government didn't come, those who was in charge were not prepared to fight. Among them there wasn't a single officer with any expectation. We were weak and we were attacked. Hybrid warfare in what place? Crimea. Crimea after the World War II was artificially inhabited by the people from the mainland of Russian Federation. And unfortunately, the Kyiv government didn't do anything for these years just to produce for these people, as in eastern part of Ukraine, produce the example of real democracy, prosperity, of real economic growth, and so on. And completely covered by the TV sets, with the propaganda, with the... we were very, very all these years in Ukraine. We didn't consider Russia as the enemy. There wasn't a single in our plans that we might fight with the Russians. We couldn't even understand. Someone told here that main impact of this invention, Mr. Putin lost Ukraine. Even I remember I gave the interview in Le Monde when I said I couldn't imagine it might be occurred. I was colonel of the Soviet army. I'm native Ukrainian. The first question was given to me, how you feel yourself? Me? I'm feeling so deeply insulted. I was born in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Crimea was part of this republic. And right now someone came to me and took part of my territory, and I'm professional soldiers in 5th generation. That is, but Mr. Putin did open the case of Pandora. Only one nation, theoretically, if there would be problem with China for Russia, might be theoretically might back right now. Mr. Putin lost Ukraine, but he attacked at the time that there wasn't government basically in Kyiv, just to make decision. If in 3 first days government would react, we wouldn't have Donbass. Believe me, we had Smeshko in 1994. There was attempt in 1994 to do the same. And by the way, also there was activities in Crimea. We arrested just all these guys. We expelled Smeshko and stopped. That is as it is. You might be attacked only when you show that you are weak. And for the civilized world, it's supposed to, for Euro-Atlantic civilization, once again, to understand this small thing. The weakness is provocating. Thank you.
In my view, hybrid warfare is not a very fortunate term, because I would prefer to talk about warfare if there is a use of military force. But nowadays we understand by hybrid warfare cases when a military force is not yet used. So it's stuck, and we have to deal with that. To discuss when hybrid warfare, or I would prefer hybrid influence, turns into a war, we need to recall what Clausewitz said about war, that war is continuation of politics by other means, by force, and the objective in the use of that force is to achieve the political objectives which we have. So if our enemy is seems that we'll be able to achieve political objectives, of course, foreign to our interests, even without using force, that's already a threshold that has been passed. NATO already has conceptual understanding of, for example, of cyber warfare, because in cyber warfare you may not use bombs and artillery shells, etc., but you can potentially achieve the same effect. For example, by destroying critical infrastructure, critical functions of society. And the general understanding in this case is that if that threshold is passed, then this is an act of war. And NATO can respond by military force and even can activate Article 5 in its response. And I would say it is similar in hybrid warfare, not the least because, although we have not discussed this, cyber attacks may be part of the toolbox of hybrid warfare. For me, the more difficult cases are when even no cyber attacks have taken place, nor military forces used, like the attempts for coup d'etat in Montenegro. This more recent case, because even without using military force, a foreign power may achieve its political objectives, which are not to conquer the country, but to put in place a ruler or a government that suits its own interests, which is the same, like doing it by force. That is more difficult, and there is no, as far as I'm aware, no legal definition, no legal. Sufficiently deep legal analysis, but I would classify this case as an act of war as well. Okay.
I don't want to. Pavel, please.
Well, the whole definition, present definition of hybrid warfare, it's kind of covert warfare. So that means that this is to go to war, but not to go to war at the same time. To be legally in the position to have plausible deniability. That you're not actually, like Russia right now is saying, we're not fighting in Donbass. We're not in Donbass, okay. So that's the whole idea. And it also can be used to lure your opponent and create a good pretext for a massive attack, like it happened, say, in Georgia. In July 2008, there was constant provocations, increased fighting in South Ossetia. It began in June, then in July. At the same time, Russia was creating the impression in Tbilisi that, as in the wars of the beginning of the 90s, it won't intervene. It's going to be a hybrid covert operation. Russia will support the Ossetians, but not really go in with an open, massive invasion. Which, of course, so the Georgians moved to Tskhinvali, and the Russians came in a prepared massive attack, and the Georgians were caught unawares, and militarily they were smacked. And the same actually happened in August 14 here in Ukraine, when the Ukrainian authorities believed that the Russians will not invade, that they will allow them to, although support, of course, their protégés in Donbass, but not will go over the border massively. And again, the same trick worked very militarily efficiently. So that's so the definition of hybrid warfare. It's covert warfare. It's to fight and not to fight at the same time.
Academics in the US and in Germany are discussing whether we perhaps suffer from a little hybrid hysteria. That's how they call it. I want to ask Susanne, who just did academic research, are we overdoing it? Every country has its spin doctors, uses public diplomacy, but when is the threshold there that these means are used as a weapon in a hybrid warfare?
Well, I think I would support our colleagues, because you should not overestimate the warfare and not underestimate the warfare. It's clear that it's a warfare when you look at the quotations, for example. So editor-in-chief of RT, Margarita Simonian, openly speaks about RT being a Ministry of Defense of the Kremlin. And RT, it's a weapon such as every other weapon, so it becomes clear that what's the goal. And as I've said in my statement, it's obvious that it's the aim to establish the concept of an enemy. It's not the aim to inform the readers and the internet followers and the internet community, but to establish this concept of an enemy. And this is as far as Germany is concerned, as far as Ukraine is concerned. And so I think it becomes clear that concerning the content, it's a warfare. But as I've already said, when you look at the range of the Russian media in Germany, it's quite limited. RT Deutsche, about 400,000 users. That's not so much. So I draw the conclusion that the sharpest weapon are the German supporters of Russia, who support the Russian narrative in nationwide media, such as nationwide TV channels. And they are, of course, very influential, such as former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, a well-known politician and well-known journalists who support this narrative. And of course, they play the decisive role in this information warfare. And of course, they are very influential, and they spread the stereotypes in the Russian public opinion, in the German public opinion, such as Crimea has always been Russian, and Ukraine isn't a state, and so on. And when I look at the public debate in Germany, and when you go to events concerning Ukraine, or the stereotypes, they are widely spread. So I think propaganda is indeed effective. But when you look at the surveys, as I've said, roughly 1/5 of the German population supports this Russian narrative in general. But it's extremely popular among the rightist and leftist population, as we've already mentioned.
So given the fact we, open societies in the West, we are under attack, what to do, how to defend ourselves?
I would like just to give 2 remarks of what we discussed right now. Facts about the first several days' invasion in Crimea. You know, the military men, this is just alphabet. You're supposed to collect information to understand what enemy is, what ally of them, what you have at the lie, right, left, what resources, and only after this you make a decision. Mr. Putin, in his interview, very good interview, when he explained the story how he organized returning of Crimea, he simply gave also pieces of very good information. Our acting president didn't serve in the army. I spoke with him personally in the first days, brought General Radetzky, Minister of Defense #2, Commander-in-Chief of the biggest tank army of the Soviet Union, 6th Guard Army, stationed in Dnipropetrovsk. This army during the Warsaw time was the biggest tank army in the world. This is Donetskaya, Dnipropetrovskaya, Luganskaya, Zaporozhskaya, Odeskaya, Crimea, all the theater of actions, basically. He came to Kyiv. He was Minister of Defense. He was Inspector General of the Armed Forces. He was Director of National Defense University in Kyiv. He knew all personnel of the army. He knew army. He came and said, I'm ready to take responsibility and to fight. And the answer was, oh, we are coalition. And coalition, this is the party of Svoboda as Minister of Defense. And we already invited Admiral Tenuch. I told, listen, Admiral Tenuch and live commanded one ship. He's a Navy officer. But coalition, we need to coalition. And when we went to Brussels in several days, I asked during the lunch with the ambassadors, really you advising to our leadership not to fight? You know, the answer was honest. We don't know. From here we are not suggesting anything, but we only asking not provocate maybe, but not provocate, it doesn't mean not to defend yourself. And finally, during this session of National Security and Defense Council, which was in the parliament without any secrecy, and several calls between our acting president and chairman of the parliament of Russian Federation, Mr. Narishkin, simply it was open cards for Russian. Our leadership don't want to fight. Can you imagine what does it for the military men if you know they will not fight? The first objective might be just Sevastopol. But after this, why not to conquer Crimea? Plus to receive information that the Western powers simply don't know how to react. Once again, in hybrid warfare, the next stage after the first stage of informational warfare to the real fighting, it depends very much from the subject which is under the attack. If you're not defending yourself, be aware, It might be the next military stage. And about the history, you know, what does it mean? Speaking about who is elder brother, Ukrainians, of course, the elder brother. After this, I was astonished on the first national channel in Russian Federation was a 45-minute show with the hundreds of people, which my picture was, and they only discussed this saying of Ukrainians said that they're elder brothers. And no facts, no historical, but whole population of Russian Federation, look, this is first channel. That is, they are changed the history. They have the very heavy propaganda, and if there wouldn't be on the territory of opponent going to the truth, as it is.
So your message is very clear. If there's a hybrid campaign going on and you don't defend yourself, you will lose the whole war.
Be prepared.
So be prepared. But what can we do? We've got this NATO Center of Information Excellence in Riga. We've got a task force at the communication in Riga. We've got a task force in Brussels at the European Union. They are monitoring hybrid propaganda warfare. Is that enough? Todor? How far did they get? What did they achieve so far?
Oh no, I will not evaluate their performance, not because I'm afraid, but I just do not follow closely enough. I think that someone said it in the morning that the best protection against hybrid influence includes deterrence. So if NATO demonstrates that it is ready to counter any move of military force against a NATO nation, that would be sufficient to probably for any opponent not to decide to attack. Okay. And NATO, in my view, in the last 2 years did a lot in that direction and continues to do a lot. And this summer we'll be witnessing 2 major exercises, probably the biggest one in a decade or more. And they're all in the eastern part of NATO. First, to test how the concept works, it would work in practice. And secondly, to give a very clear signal, reassuring the local population, but also signal to anyone who would think of attempting any aggressive action against NATO countries. And when that foundation is there, then strategic communication may be successful. If the foundation is not there, there is no communication message that can do the job.